was wondering if we could sing a cappella, It Is Well With My Soul. Many of you may know that old hymn. And to give you a little idea of what that hymn was from, a dad had sent his family back to England on a ship, and the ship sunk on the way back across the ocean. And his wife survived and sent a telegraph to her husband that said, I am fine, but all the children have perished. Come when you can. And when about the spot in the ocean that he was over, the area where his kids perished, the captain came to him and said, this is about where your kids perished. And he sat down and wrote the hymn, It Is Well With My Soul. And so I wanted to share that with you, that story, as to where that song comes from. That grief can overwhelm us, that the realities of life can be too much. But for a dad who has just buried multiple children, and on his way over to comfort his mourning wife, to write this statement, that it is well with my soul, is perhaps the greatest statement of faith and of trust. And so would you help sing a cappella, It Is Well? And if you wouldn't mind throwing it back on the screen in case if people didn't know it.
Did you want to do the hymn?
Sure. Do we have that?
In my head.
I have it in my head. Brandon, do you have it in your head? Okay.
You try with me. Here
Some
we
of you
go.
will know it, and It Is Well is the refrain of the hymn.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
I got to do the whole thing now because I can't remember. Okay, here we go. You mind?
Let's just do It Is Well.
Okay, I'm going to do it, even if I don't remember. Here we go. It is well with my soul. It is well. It is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. It is well. It is well with my soul.
So we're studying the 23rd Psalm, in which the image of the 23rd Psalm is that it is well with our soul. Because it's a psalm of trust, a statement of faith, that our God is with us. And today we're going to dive deeper into this reality and what that means for us. But I hope that that song, refrain, flows through your mind throughout this day. It is well, it is well, it is well with my soul, because our God is present with us. Would you pray with me as we get ready to start our sermon? Our God, we gather on this day, and some gather in this space on a mountaintop moment of life. A moment that we could just rejoice and sing and tell the world how amazing life is. And there are others among us that are in the valleys, that understand the phrase, the dark valley. And they wonder, how long, O God, must we dwell there? And yet you are the God who invites us to boldly proclaim that it is well with our soul, whether we are in the mountain peak moments or in the deepest and darkest valleys of our lives. And so today, would you come? Would you inspire us anew with your trust that you are the God who is with us, our shepherd? And so grant us ears that might hear and a sense of your presence this day. For the name of Jesus, our Christ, that we pray. Amen. In our tradition, today is the first Sunday of the month in which in all of our services we celebrate communion. And most often we do a unison prayer of confession. Of confessing not as a way of saying how bad we are, but of saying that we aren't always right and that we need God to restore us to a holistic place in our lives. And so today I stand before you to confess that I have been wrong about sheep. I have made sheep into bad animals that are dumb, and I have to confess that I was wrong. You see, I've often talked about sheep putting their heads down and munching their way into trouble, and that they're not real bright because they keep getting lost. And so this week I felt compelled to study sheep in a great depth. And I have learned so much about sheep that I want to share the wealth of knowledge about sheep. Because for some reason, our biblical writers love the imagery of shepherd and sheep, and so there must be a reason that it connects to us deeply. And so I wanted to share these interesting facts that I'm sure you all knew I was completely unaware of about sheep. Did you know that tennis rackets, the strings in tennis rackets are made out of sheep intestines? It takes 11 sheep to make one tennis racket's worth of, I know, right? So those of you who like to eat sheep, thank you for all the tennis players on their behalf. But some interesting facts about sheep. Sheep are extremely intelligent animals capable of problem solving. What? I thought they were dumb. Sheep also have very good memories. They can remember at least 50 other sheep and people. Like humans, sheep make different vocalizations to communicate different emotions. In fact, the shepherds will tell you that they can display and recognize emotion on other sheep's faces. Now you all want to go to the zoo today, don't you? See if they do that. Sheep are known to self-medicate when they're sick. Sheep like drugs. They will eat specific plants when ill that will cure them. Female sheep are very caring mothers and form deep bonds with their lambs that they can recognize them by their call out of a crowd of hundreds. And lastly, their vision. How many of you think sheep have good vision? How many of you have no idea? Believe it or not, sheep have the ability to almost see 360 degrees around them. Their eyes are on their side of their head, and they have amazing peripheral vision. Okay? The problem is that sheep can't see what's right in front of them. And so literally, their sense of depth perception is non-existent because they don't have the ability to see out into the future. And so now as you learn more about sheep, why do you think scriptural writers use sheep as a metaphor for us? Well, one, we're incredibly intelligent, aren't we? Everyone's supposed to be like, yeah, totally, that's me, right? Sheep are good mothers. You all are good mothers. That when you're sick, what do? You take drugs. And so we are so similar to sheep in so many ways, but the other way that we may not have thought of is that oftentimes we can't see what's right in front of us. That other times we can't see how far things are away. And so it creates this sense of fear. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. In the ancient world where David was a shepherd, there was this reality of having to take sheep to different pastures. And pastures were often far away places. And to get to those pastures, you went on the highways and byways of the world in the ancient world. And that was through the valleys between these rocky cliffs. And the interesting thing about these valleys was that they were oftentimes so deep that the amount of daylight hours that actually the sun shined in the valley was few. And so morning started very late and evening started very early. And the shepherd's job was to lead the sheep through these darkened valleys to get to the other side so that they could find the green grass and the still waters, the places of abundance. And as the sheep entered these valleys, oftentimes they would get scared because of the darkness that would surround them. And the reality that they didn't know how long the valley was because they had no sense of depth perception. And so the valley may be real short, but to them it was endless. And so they would begin to bah as a way of crying out of fear and out of concern. That their normalcy of life, of the green grass and the pasture lands was no longer. Instead, they were stuck in these long valleys. And so often we hear this passage in association with memorial services and graveside services that we think it's only about death. But have you ever walked through valleys that feel like death is crowding around you? We all have. And so valley is a metaphor in our scriptures for the low places of life, for those places that are uncomfortable, or those places that we feel off-centered, those places that disturb us and we want to get away from the valley. And so we have a couple choices. One is that we run backwards out of the valley, and oftentimes to pasture lands that are no longer any good. Second is that we hang out in the valley. Or third is that we walk through the valley. You see, I think the psalmist, David, had an idea in his mind when he used this passage to describe what life is like. Remember, the subject of this whole psalm is the shepherd who is with us and is the one who ensures that we never lack a thing. And so the shepherd knows that he has to lead the sheep through the valley in order for them to find the nourishment that they need to grow and to survive. And so nowhere does it say that the shepherd stops in the valley and hangs out. But instead the shepherd leads them through the valley so that they can get to the other side, to the place of abundance. How many of you have ever hung out in a valley before? Valleys, for me, are those places or moments of our lives where the normalcy of our life is interrupted, and we sense a risk to our well-being or an actual threat to our lives. And so what are the valleys that you and I face in our lives together? Certainly the valley of grief is a deep and dark valley. That sometimes we wonder, how long will it be before we get to the other side and see light again? Or maybe it's the valley of change. That something is going on in our world in such a way that that sense of uncomfortableness is surrounding us, and we want to get through this as fast as we can. Or maybe it's the valley of depression. That deep valley where we sense that there's no bottom to how we are feeling and no motivation to keep moving. And we wonder, how dark can dark get? Or maybe it's the valley of a lost dream or of a broken relationship or struggles that we never dreamed possible in our lives. Or maybe it's the valley of hating my job, of wishing for something more, something that would define truly who I am, that gives me great passion to awaken every morning to go do something. You see, we all are experts in valleys because we traverse them not once in life, but throughout our lives. And most often in those valleys, our prayer and our cry is like sheep. Help! Where are you, God? Help me! So the psalmist uses imagery of the shepherd's tools. I found this in our Christmas supply closets. Interestingly enough, we have the shepherd's crook, but do you know what we're lacking? And I figured out this morning at 6:30 in the morning, we don't have the club, the billy club that the shepherd would carry, because if you give it to a kid, they'll use it as a weapon. Right? But this shepherd is really fascinating, right? A replica of what shepherd's crooks look like. And you probably have seen these before and get a basic sense, right? So if Tom is straying from the fold, I can get Tom back in, right? Or maybe a sheep has been smart enough to eat the greener grass over there and has gotten stuck, and the shepherd can go and pull the shepherd back, or the sheep back up. Or maybe there's some sheep not getting along, and the shepherd can go and separate the two of them. But in the ancient world, when the shepherd would lead the sheep through the dark valley, the shepherd would constantly be talking to the sheep, reassuring them that there is presence there. The sheep will know my voice. But more importantly was that sometimes that wasn't even enough. And so the sheep needed something else to reassure them, to trust that the shepherd was there. And so the shepherd would start banging on the rocks. So the sheep would be able to follow and discern where the shepherd was leading them, all the way through the darkest of valleys, so they could get to the other side. You see, when you and I traverse the valleys of life, we're people that long to hear the whisper of God saying, "Come, follow me." But we also long to have even more assurance that beyond that, that God is with us and that God's rod and staff will lead us. And what was the rod for? Well, it was for the evil that was lurking in the shadows, the predators that would try to attack. So the shepherd was there to protect and to guide and to lead. And the same shepherd that leads through the dark valleys is the same shepherd that leads us. And there are many times in our own lives that we look at our lives and say, this valley is never going to end because our depth perception is out of sync. But yet the shepherd knows how far it is to go and leads us in a way that allows us to find life anew. In the depth of the valleys, it's the hope that we don't survive them, but that instead we thrive in them. That in the valley we have much to learn about ourselves and about our God, about trust, about letting go, of listening. Many years ago, I was at the airport and wanted a book for a short flight, so I found the shortest book in the bookstore. And it's a book by Spencer Johnson, who wrote another book called Who Moves My Cheese, and it's a fable called Peaks and Valleys. And Peaks and Valleys is a story about a young guy who has been living in the valley and wants to dwell up on the mountaintop experience of life, on the peak. And so he decides one day that he's going to leave the valley and start traversing the mountains so he can get to the peak and see what's up there. And so he begins to climb, and when he gets to the top, he looks out among the sights and sees the beauty of what's all around him. And suddenly he hears a voice. It's the voice of an old man, a wise sage. He begins to invite him into a conversation about what does it mean to be in valleys and what does it mean to be on peaks. And what lessons do we learn in both? And so he sends him back down into a valley for him to traverse and to learn some more lessons. And later in the book, he comes back up, and he's different. He's not as young, but he's much wiser. For in being in the valley, he's growing in wisdom. I wanted to read a section of the young man's reflection on his experience in the valleys and his understanding of the peaks. He said to the old man, "I did not appreciate that my valley was an opportunity for me to grow, to create something better in my life. I was just trying to escape my valley, not learn from it." He added, "I see now that when I get outside myself and look for the gift hidden in that valley, it can bring me to a new and better place." The young man thought further and then added, "I don't know if this is right, but it seems to me that the purpose of the peak is to celebrate life, and the purpose of the valley is to learn about life." None of us want valleys. We wish that we could be on the peak forever. And the peak is a beautiful place to be. But my guess is that there's more than a few of us in here that are in a valley. And are wondering, how far is it and how long will I be in this darkest of valleys? And today my hope is that what you hear is there's a shepherd that's leading you. And in this valley, there's some lessons to learn. And when you learn those lessons, the valley has purpose. It has meaning. It has a reason. And so today, as we prepare ourselves to receive communion, my hope is that you'll pause and remember, the Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. And then you trust that. And you walk through the valleys of life so that you may see the gloriousness of our God who leads us. And so for a few moments, I invite you into the silence of this moment to think about the valleys that you have traversed and the lessons you've learned, and to say thank you for the mountaintop moments that you have experienced. And so would you close your eyes and join me in a moment of silence?